On September 8, 1941, German and Finnish troops captured Schlüsselburg and cut Leningrad's last land connection. With the rest of the country, the city was surrounded. The siege began, the longest and most terrifying act of heroism of the Great Patriotic War. It wasn't just residence workers, women, children, and the elderly who were trapped in this gigantic trap. There were also troops and refugees from the captured territories. In total, nearly 3 million people to 1,887,000, to be precise. This isn't just a number. This represents 3 billion mouths to feed, 3 million lives condemned to inhumane trials. The enemy was certain the city would die on its own. The plan was for the complete destruction of Leningrad, its population, and its cultural heritage. The countdown began for 872 days, nearly 2.5 years of struggle for survival. The first and foremost enemy was hunger. Its arrival was officially documented, with clear, chilling figures. Bread rations were reduced 5 times. Workers who stood at their machines under bombardment were entitled to 250 grams of bread per day. In November 1941, everyone else, employees, dependents, and children, received only 125. But this wasn't bread as we understand it. In the worst days, its recipe was monstrous. Flour made up only 10 to 15%. The rest was food pulp, cake, wallpaper dust, pine needles, and the residue from socks. This dark, sticky bar provided almost no nutritional energy and merely deceived the stomach. Prolonging the agony, death became commonplace. People died on the way to work, in line for water, next to sleeping relatives. Historians are still trying to determine the exact number of victims of the siege, but on average, modern historians put the figure at 1,500,000, and 97% of them died of starvation. The only thread connecting Leningrad with the mainland was the road of life, the route across Lake Ladoga. In summer, across the water, under constant air and artillery attacks. In winter, across thin, treacherous ice. This wasn't a road, but a frontline highway with its own crews and heroes. A truck carrying a ton of cargo required ice at least 20 centimeters thick. The first convoys in November 1941 marched when the ice was barely 12 centimeters thick. Trucks drove with their doors open to allow time for escape. Drivers drove them at night, without headlights, using markers driven into the ice as guidance. Ice holes, bombings, fierce winds. Every trip was a mortal risk, but it was precisely along this icy artery that life pulsed. During the first, most terrible winter, more than 550,000 people, mostly women and children, were evacuated from the city, and they were bringing grain into the city. In total, over 1,615,000 tons of cargo were delivered along the road of life during its entire operation. Of this, 432,000 tons were food. It was counted in grams, in vehicles, in lives saved. It was an absolute mathematical achievement. The price of drivers' blood was measured in tons of flour and thousands of saved children's souls. But Leningrad didn't just survive. It worked, fought, and created, against all odds, in factories where windows had been shattered by explosions, and the workshops were frozen at minus 40 degrees Celsius. People were repairing tanks and making shells. Teenagers stood at their machines, pushing boxes under them because they couldn't reach them. Classes were in session in schools, and books were being lent out in libraries. The metronome became a symbol of the city's beating heart. Its beat echoed on the radio 24/7. A fast beat meant an air raid siren. A slow beat meant all clear. It was the sound of life continuing. But patience, hunger, and death could not last forever. The Red Army Command was preparing a response. By early 1943, a powerful strike force had been amassed near Leningrad. The plan for Operation Iskra, codenamed Iskra, was clear and brutal. Counterattacks from two fronts, Leningrad from the west and Volkhov from the east, to carve a corridor through the German defenses and restore land communications. Early in the morning of January 12, 1943, after a powerful artillery barrage involving guns from the Baltic Fleet ships and coastal artillery, Soviet troops went on the offensive. These were incredibly difficult battles. Over the course of a year and a half, the enemy had transformed its positions into a veritable fortress. Pillboxes, minefields, barbed wire. Our soldiers stormed through deep snow under heavy fire. The spark of hope remained. On January 18, 1943, at 9:30 a.m., near Workers' Settlement No. 1 near Schlüsselburg, units of the 123rd Rifle Brigade of the Leningrad Front linked up with soldiers of the 372nd Division of the Volkhov Front. The siege was broken. In just 18 days, at the cost of incredible efforts, a railway was built across the recaptured narrow strip of land, in places no more than 8 to 11 kilometers wide. It was called the Road of Victory. This frontline route, constantly shelled by the Germans, was already carrying trains carrying food, fuel, and ammunition. The first tons of coal and oil arrived in Leningrad. The situation in the city began to change radically. Hope for life returned. However, a full year remained before the enemy was completely routed and the siege lifted. German troops stood at the very walls. The city remained within artillery range, and casualties continued. The decisive blow was dealt in January 1944. On January 14, troops of the Leningrad, Volkhov, and Second Baltic Fronts launched the large-scale Leningrad-Novgorod strategic operation. The might of the Soviet artillery this time was devastating. There were over 200 guns and mortars per kilometer of the front. On January 20, troops of the Leningrad front liberated Novgorod, threatening to encircle the entire German force near Leningrad. The Germans, realizing this threat, began a hasty retreat. Soviet troops launched a determined pursuit, liberating city after city, town after town. January 27, 1944, became a day awaited for 872 days. On that day, a victory salute was fired in Leningrad. Not just salvos, but a ceremonial first-category artillery salute, 324 guns, 24 salvos. It was the highest form of gratitude from the motherland. The city, which for so long had heard only the roar of enemy shelling, now deafened itself with a salute in honor of its own liberation. People took to the streets, wept, embraced each other and unknown soldiers. These were tears that mingled the grief of incredible losses and the joy of an incredible victory. What remains after these 872 days? Not just the numbers that still send a chill down our spines. Over 1.5 million dead, 150,000 shells, 125 grams of bread. What remains is the story of incredible spiritual resistance. When, in conditions as close to absolute evil as possible, people continued to be human. Soldiers, receiving 300 grams of crackers, shared them with hungry children. Today, we look back on this time from a different world. We cannot fully comprehend this pain, this cold, this hunger. And that, perhaps, is happiness.